So this morning we're in Varied. I'm really sorry, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, so apologies if I'm butchering the name. And it's one of my favorite places to shoot in Lofoten. I really love being here because I really love shooting waterscapes. When I was learning landscape photography in Portugal, one of the only things that I had to shoot was the Atlantic coast. So I kind of learned photography through shooting waterscapes and getting close to the ocean and shooting. So to come to a place like this where you've got this wonderful snowy landscape and this mountain in the background, it's just such a wonderful place to shoot, and it's always relatively quiet here. Our group here for the workshop, we're the only people shooting here this morning. Now, we didn't really get a colourful sunrise. There's no light, there's no colour, but this is the kind of place where that doesn't actually matter. You can create really moody shots here with the clouds, so as long as it's not raining, you can shoot here. And there's quite a lot of action in the water. The waves are quite heavy, which gives us a lot of movement to be able to put in the foreground. But generally when I'm shooting it, that's what I'm going to be trying to do. And looking at shutter times of around half a second to a second, because you want to blur the water. Blurring the water really does make it look better and brings in the movement, but blurring it too much. So if you're going for things like 2 seconds or 5 seconds, it starts to soften the water and take all of the movement out of it too much. And you can see where we are. There's a mood to this place, and the mood works better with it's not, it doesn't work as well when it looks calm. So you want to keep some of that water aggression there. So no, we've been shooting here for about an hour now. I think we're just about ready to pack up and go and have breakfast. But I think it's been a really productive shoot. It's a wonderful place to be. And well, anyway, when we get the images on the computer, we'll see how they come out.
So with a waterscape like this, the first decision you have to make is whether to shoot landscape or portrait format. Now here, a landscape included too much on the right and left side of the mountains and the water and the rocks, which really wasn't important and didn't add anything to the scene. But shooting in portrait format allowed me to just have the main peaks in the background and have the water racing up towards the camera. Now, because wide-angle lenses distort the edge of the frame, this actually stretches out the water in the foreground, and I look for rocks and shapes that would support that. Now I found this patch here where the water was running up and over the rocks in a way that I really felt fit with a more portrait vertical composition that I was using. You're always looking for shapes and patterns that are in harmony with each other and in harmony with the composition that you've got. So here with the portrait format, I was looking for strong verticals which would help move the eye towards the focal point of the mountain peaks here at the back. And water moving through the foreground here created a kind of vertical leading line into the image. Once you've got your composition settled, then you need to think about shutter time. So there's not a fixed rule here. It really depends on how fast the water is moving. But I knew I wanted to capture some dynamism in the water and not remove that drama with a really long exposure of something around 20 seconds, because that would have made the water all very blurred and quite misty. Likewise, using a really fast shutter speed that completely froze the water would be too static, which would again remove any dynamism, any drama from the water. So I was looking at shutter times between half a second and 2 seconds, where the water was blurred, but not so much that it removed all of the movement. And another factor with capturing moving water is whether to fire the shutter as the water advances towards you, up the beach, or when it recedes away. And again, there's no rule here. It really depends on the location and the speed of the water and various different things. Now, here I preferred the water as it was racing up the beach. And I found that the best time to fire the shutter was just before the water reached its peak and started to retreat, because earlier than that, and there was too much rock showing in the foreground, which meant that I lost the leading lines of the water. Now these kind of waterscapes are always a lot of fun to make, trying to capture the perfect bit of water movement, watching the waves and timing when you're going to fire the shutter. It can take ages and you can lose literally hours, but it's always satisfying when you manage to get a few frames that you're really happy with. And of course, you've always got to be really careful because of the occasional rogue wave that comes much higher than what you expected and much higher than all the other waves did and soaks you all the way through. One of the places that I really love shooting sunrises in Lofoten are these islands around Fredvang. Now there's this really long fjord with these peaks at the southern end which really capture the first light of the morning when the sun comes up. And there's also lots of space to move around on the islands and to find a foreground composition that really works. Now, It's a place you can shoot also with a lot of different focal lengths. So for example, this is it. This is a 10 millimeter with a really wide angle lens. And this is it in about the mid range with a 40 millimeter lens. And this is at about 140 millimeters with a telephoto. Now, it really depends on what the foreground is doing. To shoot it really wide here, it works better if there's lots of snow around, because without it, the islands are quite brown and muddy, and it's not really an appealing foreground. If you want to shoot it a little bit longer and remove the island, it works better when there are reflections, which really depends on how much of the wind there is. Now, the fort is actually quite well protected with mountains all around it, so it doesn't get too windy, but it is rare to find it completely still. And when we were here this year, there really wasn't enough snow to shoot it wide, so we actually focused on those reflections. Even though, the wind wasn't perfectly still. Now, there's a lot of heavy cloud on the horizon, and it wasn't until around an hour after the sunrise that we got this dynamic light that really lit the scene up with these beautiful color tones. And I shot it at a couple of different focal lengths, but it's this one at 24 millimeters, which is my favorite. The peak at the center still has plenty of prominence, but you also get a sense of context and scale from the other peaks at the side. And there's a line of mountains which kind of works with in combination with the clouds to create these subtle lines that direct the eye towards the peak, which is the brightest part of the image. Now, even as I said, even though there's a little bit of wind and the reflections weren't perfect, they were certainly good enough to include. And the island, as I said, was very muddy, so I didn't want to include it as a foreground, and instead I just let the water, where it was dark, because it was reflecting the darker sky, I just let that work as a natural frame. One of the nice things about this location is a number of different compositions you can shoot from pretty much at the same spot. So the light was really nice on this particular morning, and the shape of these peaks over here in the background really caught my eye. So I switched to a telephoto lens to actually pull that part of the scene closer. For the composition here, it's all about trying to find a focal point to build the image around, and it's this dark peak here with the light behind it, which I thought really pulled my eye towards it. So I framed quite tightly because I wanted the glow of the light to be a major element in the scene. And then the composition revolves around what you're going to include and what you're going to leave out to support that. Now, I wanted to strengthen the V around this peak with this other V here that kind of supports it. And it felt to me that the mountains on the right and left had these diagonals which kind of created these V shapes which pulled your eye in. And I tried to side a crop at the bottom to keep the image neater and cut off the water, but I really felt in the end that it worked better with water at the bottom because it kind of balanced the sky.
So we've just stopped here to do some shooting. We were actually on our way to a different location. We were going to go to Nussfjord, which is a small village around the corner, because we had a lot of overcast weather today. It was really cloudy, and that's a village with lots of red cabins that really kind of works in that moody weather. But we passed this peak. I don't know if you can see it there. And it just looked really great in the moody weather, in the cloudy weather. And there's a really nice stream with a small waterfall that runs down in front of it, which just makes for a fantastic foreground interest with an ultra wide angle lens shot. But as soon as we set up, the clouds disappeared. So now we've got this blue sky, which it's kind of lovely weather, but it's detracted a little bit from the mood of the shot, from how I envisioned it. But putting that aside, it's a really lovely location, and I get a lot of satisfaction from finding these places spontaneously, from just seeing places that you're driving past and looking at them and then evaluating whether they're going to work compositionally and then making a shot. Now, they don't always work. In fact, most of the time they don't. More often than not, they don't. But it's nice when they do. And I think when you do a trip like this, particularly on a workshop, it's very easy to do lots of research and to have like a set list of all the places that you're going to see. And sometimes within that, it's possible to lose a little bit of spontaneity and find that you miss some shots that you would otherwise see if you spent a lot more time just driving around slowly and looking around. So this has been a really nice stop, and I'm really hoping that the shot works. But even if it doesn't, it's a lovely spot to shoot, and it's just great to do some shooting.
Now, the stream made a waterfall at the bottom of the mountain, but it was quite small, so I needed to get as close as I could to the water and shoot it extremely wide to give it more prominence in the image, as well as fitting in the mountain behind. It's a pretty straightforward shot, and the mountain is centered as a focal point with a 4-stop neutral density filter just to blur the water a little bit. I played around with vertical and horizontal compositions, and my instinct was to shoot it vertical but that included a lot of foreground ice, which was quite dirty in front of the waterfall, and also a lot of sky in the image, which I really felt weakened both the waterfall and the mountain because they became a lot less prominent in the frame. So in the end, I shot it horizontally and cropped it to a 4:3 ratio, and removed the sides, which again, they were distracting. They didn't have any benefit towards the composition. Now, I think there's an interesting conversation to have about when negative space weakens a composition, which I felt was the case with this image, and when negative space can benefit a composition, which I feel was the case here with this image that I shot earlier this year in the Dolomites. I think in all compositions, we're looking for balance and harmony of elements. And sometimes it's just something that we feel when we look at the scene, or maybe later when we look at it on a computer, but it's not necessarily something that's easy to explain. Just around the corner from the waterfall we shot is the road to Nussfjord and Storavattnet, which has this stretch of straight road which leads towards these peaks of Flagstadoya here. Now, I've always liked this bit of road. The mountains at the end are really fantastic with these incredible cliffs, this kind of cliff wall here, but it doesn't really have a focal point, something like a peak that you can use to anchor the image with. What it does have is these peaks which have a natural harmony with this kind of wave with this V in the middle of the peaks, and the road creates a really strong leading line that runs directly towards that. And this does make the image feel quite balanced, but because the image still lacks a real focal point, and to give it some scale, it really helps to have a figure on the road. So we volunteered James, who was one of the participants on the workshop, basically because he had a red jacket on, and that just gave us a bit of scale and also a nice contrasting splash of color in the scene. And now right next to the road, we found this small lake called Mavatnet, which has these really nice dark blue tones in the water, which I felt really worked well at the blue hour, combining with the sky. Now I wanted a really wide angle lens here to fit in the sweep of peaks at the background, as well as some sky, but I also wanted to get these complete pieces of ice here in the front that were floating in the water, as I felt they worked really well as a foreground element. And they also provided contrast with the dark blues of the water. I really like the tones. The different shades of blue and white give a really reduced color palette that works really well with a cool winter scene like this. And for the composition, I wanted to have a subtle S-curve here that would lead your eye through the foreground along the water to the main peak at the back, which is also highlighted by that little piece of brighter sky around it. Now, it's important when you're shooting wide angle images like this. There's a lot of visual information that's going to be in the frame, so you have to try to keep it as clean and as organized as possible. So I wanted to make sure that there are no branches or things like that sticking into the frame from the sides or from the bottom. And also I excluded the snowy bank of the lake that I was actually standing on. With just the water along the bottom of the frame, it gives me a dark edge of the frame, which I felt balanced against the darkness of the sky. And it also makes these pieces of ice stronger. Now, if it had that bit of white at the bottom of the frame, it would have made the bottom of the frame really bright. And that's really going to catch your eye and also detract from the pieces of ice and make the whole image feel a lot weaker. Then finally, there's the exposure. Now, I tried a few short exposures, but in the end, what I really liked was a long exposure. This is actually about 4 minutes long because it really blurred the clouds, and I felt that really matched the smooth feel of the water and the ice in the lake. All right, so that's it for this video. I hope it's been useful and I hope it's been interesting. And if you have any questions at all, just drop me a line in the comments below or send me an email and I'll get back to you. As ever, thanks for watching, and as always, take care.